just to make sure. Christ is risen.
He is risen indeed.
What is your first memory of Easter? Now you have to think back. Some of you a long time. I would be insulting like that. How old were you? Where were you? Church? Someone said in church? I heard that. Church. Well, my first memory of Easter, I think, is being at my grandparents' house in Kiwani. And I had a new dress. And best of all, I had an Easter bonnet. It was a beautiful Easter bonnet. And I loved my Easter bonnet. And the fact of the matter is I still to this day have my Easter bonnet. But my friend Sam tells me a story and some reflections on it about his first Easter. He has a very different kind of memory. He was 6 or 7 years old, and he woke up early, and like me, he had new clothes, and so he jumped out of bed so that he could put on his new clothes, and it was Easter, and that was great, and he suddenly remembered that the house was very quiet. Where is everybody? Now, his mother lived in the house, his aunt lived in the house, but it was quiet. And so he was filled with fear, and he searched around, and finally he looked out a second floor window, and he saw his mother and his aunt walking back towards the house. And he ran to them and he questioned them, "Where have you been?" Because it was right. Well, they had been to the cemetery to visit their father's grave. And as Sam looked at his mother, he saw a sadness in her eyes, but also a joy. Because in the midst of death, there doesn't have to be fear. And that is what he remembers. Joy along with fear. And that day he had joy and fear at the same time. Now when the women went to the tomb, they were filled with sadness and fear. It wasn't a safe place to be going. And they had been, you see, with Jesus all week. And they had seen the trouble that was happening. They saw things brewing. And of course they knew that Pilate was not a good man. And they remembered all the things that Jesus had said, and still their friend was dead. And he had said to his followers so many times that he would be with them. And now this person says, "Go meet Jesus in Galilee." Galilee, that's where you met him the very first time. Up in Galilee. Well, those of you who know the Holy Land very well will know that Galilee is 4 days' walk from Jerusalem. And can you imagine those followers of Jesus trudging along for 4 days going, "We watched him die, and now he says to meet him in Galilee. We are either crazy or God has done a wonderful thing." And when they got there, Jesus was there, and they got to spend 40 days with him. And they knew he really was living. And therefore, there was hope, and there was joy. Now, like Sam, those followers of Jesus felt hope and joy, but at the same time, there was sadness. They were still affected by watching Jesus suffer and die. I suspect there was some biblical PTSD here going on. Jesus says to his disciples, "Don't be afraid." Don't be afraid. But, we are filled with fear and anxiety. We see frightening things all around us. And I wonder how I would react if I had been there, if I had been seeing Jesus crucified, if I had hidden out for fear of the Romans, if all my hopes had been dashed. I live on this side of the resurrection. It's really different on the other side. Would I be filled with joy as well? What if there was a huge catastrophe in our lives? Not a huge catastrophe, but on the way up here on Good Friday, there was a terrible accident on 53 at Kirchhoff Road. Cars were backed up for miles. And there was a car that had been in an accident. It had started on fire. That was a really scary thing. Would I have been full of fear and just fear? Or would there be fear and joy? Because in the midst of that catastrophe, there was still life. Someone's house gets hit by a tornado. People give thanks because people they loved are still alive. Maybe their stereo's gone, but people are alive. What if a horrible thing happened to a child? It's kind of a focus that we hear these days. Of children getting hurt at school. Well, what if someone set off a bomb in our church? That happens. It happens in Egypt. That's happened in Syria. It's happened in all sorts of places. It happened in Atlanta. It happened in all sorts of places. What if that were to happen? Would we just be filled with fear? Or would there be fear and joy at the same time? Well, my friends, I confess, I'm a coward. I'm a chicken. And I would be afraid. Most likely, I would be very angry as well. There are Christians all over the world who are facing catastrophic hardships. And their leaders give us a lot of wisdom. And they respond like this when you ask, how do you deal with this when disasters happen time and time again? And they respond. This is the patriarch in Egypt. We go into these times with peace and dignity. Jesus is with us. We don't like withstanding these hardships, but they are a part of our lives, and so peace and dignity is how we have learned to live. Sometimes we will experience even death, but we have been trained over our lives to have hope and faith that death is not the final word. And because of that, we don't feel as afraid. There was a time when I thought my life was about as safe as they could come. When I was 4 or 5 years old, that ended at the Cuban Missile Crisis. Some of us have children and grandchildren and neighbors, and we fear for them. Some of us have jobs that aren't so stable, and we fear for our future. There is violence and people that we don't trust. And when we think of these things, we are faced with the question, what difference does Easter make in these times? When we are afraid, we have a tendency to go to our most easy mindset. And that mindset is to generalize who's good and who's bad. And our adrenaline gets us going towards the bad. If one person has injured me, then all people like that are bad. My neighbor said to me, if one Latino commits a crime, that means they're all bad. I said that to me 2 days ago. If one quiet loner teen commits a school shooting, then all are bad. Everybody like that is bad and they should be locked up. Heard that too. You know, it's natural to do that, but it's not right. It's not right for us to stay in that anger and that irrational thinking. We just can't do this. In our fear, we cannot hate all people because they are similar to someone we're afraid of. Because it's not true. That's letting fear control our lives. Hate must be overcome by love. And Jesus himself showed us that love. Death must be overcome by love. And that is what Easter is about. Jesus sends us out and we will feel fear and joy at the same time. But Easter means that death will never have the final word. Jesus said, I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, though they die, shall have life. And that is what Jesus says to us. God is love. God so loved the world that he gave his only son to die for us. And so today, I want to send you a command sort of sense. Go out into the world in spite of your fear, filled with a combination of fear, but also hope and joy. Don't give up because of Easter. Don't give up on life because of Easter. Hang on to that joy and hope in the promise that God defeated death and shows us how to respond to it as faithful people. Amen.
Amen.
And may the peace of God that passes all understanding keep your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus our Lord.